What was the exact moment, let me ask you, Kate, when you realised Madeleine had gone?
Well, I went back to do a check at 10 o'clock and I went through the patio doors at the back and I listened for a minute in the living room and it was all quiet, and I just noticed that the door to the children's bedroom was quite far open, and we always leave it just so it's slightly ajar just to let a little bit of light in. And I thought to myself,
David Payne, a member of the Tapas 9, was not merely a witness. He was an official suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Police investigations formally named him as a suspect, and the evidence surrounding him is deeply troubling. He wasn't just part of the group. He was at the very center of suspicion. Disturbing witness statements, his unsettling behavior, and his key role in the conflicting timeline all point directly to him. David Payne was hiding something. The real question is no longer if, but what, and why has the truth been buried behind layers of silence and protection for so long? In the tangled web of the Madeleine McCann case, 9 individuals stand at the heart of every timeline, every contradiction, and every lingering question. They are known collectively as the Tapas 9. A term coined because of their nightly dining routine at the Ocean Club's Tapas restaurant. To truly understand the hidden forces at play in this mystery, we must begin by examining the people themselves. First, there are Jerry and Kate McCann, the parents of Madeleine. Both are physicians, Jerry, a cardiologist, and Kate, a general practitioner. Outwardly, they were the typical professional couple on a family holiday, but beneath the surface, Jerry's dominant personality often dictated the group's decisions. He was driven, focused on control, and deeply concerned with maintaining appearances, both during the vacation and in its tragic aftermath. Kate, on the other hand, appeared quieter, more reserved, often slipping into the background. Yet it was her image, as a grieving mother, that became the global face of the case. Then there are David and Fiona Payne. David Payne, another doctor, was perhaps the most controversial figure among them. His name repeatedly appears in testimonies filled with contradictions and odd behaviors. He was not only a close friend of the McCanns, but also Jerry's staunch ally. Fiona, his wife, is often portrayed as supportive, but relatively unremarkable in the broader narrative, aside from being a witness who backed her husband's version of events. Matthew and Rachel Oldfield form another part of this complex circle. Matthew, a doctor as well, plays a crucial role in several critical moments during the night of Madeleine's disappearance. Rachel, a recruitment consultant, is typically seen as quiet and compliant. While they appear less prominent, their presence serves to bolster the group's collective alibi. Next is Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner, a couple whose involvement is marked by unusual observations and lingering doubts. Russell, also a doctor, remains relatively peripheral but does appear in several key points of the story. Jane Tanner, however, would become one of the most infamous figures due to her claim of seeing a man carrying a child near the McCann apartment on the night of the disappearance, a sighting that shaped much of the early investigation. Lastly, Diane Webster, Fiona Payne's mother, was the only older adult in the group. Although she was largely uninvolved in the inner dynamics, she became an unexpected witness through her calm, but sometimes inconsistent recollections. Despite their varying levels of prominence, the dynamics between these 9 individuals formed a delicate power structure, one that shaped their actions and responses. At the core of this structure stood Jerry McCann. His personality, as pieced together from multiple accounts, was assertive, often bordering on domineering. He appeared to orchestrate the group's narrative, pushing for a unified front and directing others on what to say publicly and privately. His keen awareness of optics, of how the media and police would perceive their actions, gave him an outsized influence in the group. David Payne occupied a uniquely complicated position. While ostensibly Jerry's closest confidant, he also drew uncomfortable attention due to his unsettling behavior, particularly regarding his visit to apartment 5A and his odd gestures described in other testimonies. Payne's presence in the group seemed to serve 2 purposes. as Jerry's loyal supporter, and as a critical piece in maintaining their collective timeline. His role went beyond friendship. He was a key part of ensuring the story remained consistent. The remaining couples, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield, Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner, though seemingly peripheral, played essential roles in providing cover for the central figures. Their testimonies often aligned in ways that suggested a rehearsed narrative, even when minor inconsistencies appeared. Their function was subtle but critical, to validate the collective version of events and, by extension, protect Jerry and David from deeper scrutiny. Throughout the investigation, one pattern emerges repeatedly: Jerry McCann's apparent indifference to hands-on parenting during the holiday. Numerous testimonies and later analyses suggest that he largely detached himself from child care, frequently prioritizing tennis, socializing, and other adult activities over spending time with his children. One telling example comes from a personal reflection documented in the case records. It reveals Jerry's refusal to interrupt his tennis game to help Kate with the children, instead sending David Payne to check on her. The commentary is scathing, observing that Jerry seemed to believe his tennis game was more important than assisting his wife or spending even a brief moment with his children during the holiday. Another statement reflects similar sentiments. They did so little with the children in the first place, and the only fun time they had with them was that little half hour before bed at the playground. And he goes and makes his tennis lesson for that time, leaving her to deal with the kids. The words paint a vivid portrait of a man who viewed parenting as secondary to his personal leisure. This pattern of behavior wasn't isolated. Other testimonies highlight how the children were routinely placed in the resort's childcare facilities, while the adults enjoyed their daytime activities, with little interaction between parents and children beyond obligatory check-ins. This detached parenting style raises unsettling questions, not just about personal choices, but also about what it reveals regarding their emotional priorities and decision-making. Furthermore, the dynamics within the group suggest an atmosphere of subtle tensions, masked by superficial politeness. Several accounts indicate that David Payne and Matthew Oldfield may have sympathized with Kate McCann, recognizing her struggle under the weight of Jerry's dominance. Payne was noted for occasionally mocking Jerry's treatment of his wife, both in public settings like the bus and in more intimate social gatherings. Yet, despite such undercurrents, the group consistently closed ranks when confronted by outsiders. They presented a unified front, downplaying internal disputes and reaffirming each other's accounts during police interviews. This behavior suggests a deliberate strategy, whether conscious or instinctive, to maintain cohesion at all costs, likely fueled by a shared fear of legal consequences or social disgrace. In retrospect, what appears on the surface to be a group of vacationing friends begins to look more like a carefully managed alliance, held together by mutual interest and a tacit agreement to protect their collective narrative. Each member played a role, whether as a leader, a supporter, or a background figure, to ensure that their story remained intact. As we delve deeper into this case, it becomes increasingly clear that the people involved were far more complex than they initially seemed. Behind the smiling holiday photos and tearful press conferences lay a network of relationships, secrets, and shifting allegiances that continue to cloud the truth of what really happened in apartment 5A. At the heart of the Madeleine McCann case lies a highly contentious and confusing time frame, the 30-minute window between approximately 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. on May 3, 2007. This period, now often referred to by researchers as the Payne visit window, has drawn relentless scrutiny due to the conflicting statements made by the key individuals involved. These contradictions revolve around whether David Payne, one of the members of the Tapas 9 group, visited the McCann's apartment 5A that evening, and where exactly each group member was during that crucial half hour. According to Kate McCann, she returned to their apartment around 5:40 p.m. that evening after an afternoon at the beach, because Madeleine was tired. Kate and Jerry then bathed the children before Jerry left for a pre-arranged tennis session around 6 p.m. Kate stated that while she was showering at approximately 6:30 p.m., David Payne knocked on their patio door. In her testimony, she claimed that Payne did not enter the apartment and that he simply asked if she needed help with taking the children to the recreation area. She described his visit as lasting no more than 30 seconds. Jerry McCann's testimony appears to corroborate this narrative, but with significant variations. He claimed that while playing tennis around 6:30 p.m., David Payne approached him and asked whether he intended to continue playing. Jerry told Payne he was unsure, because Kate might need help with the children. He stated that Payne then offered to check on Kate and left the tennis courts, returning minutes later to confirm that everything was fine. David Payne's own statement supports this general timeline, but introduces additional ambiguity. Payne claimed that he visited the tennis courts, spoke with Jerry, and then went to check on Kate at Jerry's suggestion. He recalled entering the McCann's apartment via the patio doors and seeing the children already bathed and in their pajamas. He described them as looking immaculate, and mentioned that he had a brief conversation with Kate before leaving to resume playing tennis. While this trio of accounts may initially seem aligned, the situation becomes far murkier when we consider the statements of the other Tapas 9 members. Fiona Payne, David's wife, testified that she and her mother, Diane Webster, were at the beach until around 6:15 p.m. before heading to the tennis courts. According to her, they remained at the courts until approximately 7 p.m. before returning to their apartment, where David joined them around 10 minutes later to assist with bathing their children. Notably, she made no mention of David leaving the courts to visit the McCanns during this time frame. Diane Webster's statement closely mirrors Fiona's, affirming that they stayed at the tennis courts until around 7 p.m. and returned to the apartment shortly afterward. She also stated that David arrived roughly 10 minutes later to help with the children, again omitting any mention of his visit to apartment 5A. Matthew Oldfield added another layer of inconsistency. He stated that he, along with David Payne and Russell O'Brien, attended a men's social tennis session starting around 6 p.m. and lasting until approximately 7 p.m. Matthew specifically mentioned that Jerry McCann was already at the courts when they arrived. He did not recall David Payne leaving the courts at any point during that time frame. Jane Tanner's account introduces even more complexity. She testified that David, Matthew, and Russell left the beach early to attend the tennis session. She stated that she and other women, along with the children, arrived at the tennis courts around 6:20 p.m. and saw all the men, including Jerry, already on the court. Jane noted that she believed Kate was back at the apartment, putting the children to bed during this time, but she made no mention of seeing David leave the courts. Rachel Oldfield echoed Jane's account, saying that the men had left the beach around 6:30 p.m. for tennis, and that the women and children followed shortly afterward. She estimated their arrival at the courts to be around 7 p.m., just as the men were finishing up their session. Again, there was no reference to David Payne visiting apartment 5A. Russell O'Brien added yet another perspective, stating that he arrived at the tennis courts with Matthew around 6 p.m. and believed that David Payne had briefly visited the apartment before joining them. However, he also described playing tennis with David until around 7:30 p.m., leaving questions about whether Payne had enough time to visit apartment 5A unnoticed. These conflicting testimonies raise several critical questions. Who was really at the tennis courts during that half hour? Did David Payne actually visit the McCann's apartment, as claimed by Kate, Jerry, and David himself? Or did he remain at the courts throughout the entire period, as suggested by nearly every other witness? The inconsistencies extend beyond minor memory lapses. They strike at the very heart of the case's timeline. How could such a significant event, the only confirmed adult visit to apartment 5A during that time frame, go entirely unnoticed by every other member of the group? This confusion points to the deeper complexities of the case. Whether due to faulty memories, intentional omissions, or coordinated narratives, The testimonies surrounding David Payne's alleged visit to apartment 5A remain among the most contested and enigmatic elements of the Madeleine McCann investigation. A deep analysis of the witness testimonies in the Madeleine McCann case reveals not only glaring contradictions but also potential signs of carefully coordinated statements. Among all the details in their interviews, few stand out more than the conflicting descriptions surrounding a specific event: David Payne's alleged visit to the McCann's apartment. A close reading of the testimonies exposes discrepancies that go beyond normal memory lapses and raise serious questions about possible collaboration in crafting a unified story. At the heart of the confusion is the timeline offered by Kate McCann, Jerry McCann, and David Payne himself. Each of these three individuals describes the supposed visit in similar terms. Kate recalls being in the apartment alone with the children, preparing them for bed after Jerry had left for tennis, when David appeared briefly to offer assistance. Jerry claims that while he was at the tennis courts, David approached him and offered to check on Kate and the children. David then corroborates their accounts, stating that he did indeed visit the apartment, entering through the patio doors and seeing the children ready for bed. Yet, despite the similarity in their testimonies, the timing details within these three accounts subtly diverge. Kate references a visit around 6:30 to 6:40 p.m., during which she was drying off from a shower. Jerry also places David's visit during the same general window, while he was still playing tennis. David's recollection, however, is vague and peppered with uncertainty. He repeatedly uses ambiguous language, stating that he thinks or believes that he went to check on Kate after speaking with Jerry. The troubling aspect of these accounts lies not just in their minor timing inconsistencies, but in the conspicuous absence of corroboration from every other member of their social circle. Fiona Payne, Diane Webster, Matthew Oldfield, Jane Tanner, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield all fail to mention David Payne leaving the tennis courts or visiting the McCann's apartment. This is not a trivial omission. Given that the group was known for meticulously monitoring each other's movements during the holiday, it is highly suspicious that an event described as casually routine by three people could go completely unnoticed by the rest. Furthermore, these same witnesses provide consistent recollections that directly contradict the core trio's narrative. They place David at the tennis courts continuously throughout the key time frame, with some even recalling playing tennis alongside him during the exact window in question. This sharp split in the testimonies creates an unusual dynamic. Only Kate, Jerry, and David recall the visit, while everyone else either ignores it or denies its plausibility. Such a divide raises the possibility that some testimonies may have been intentionally constructed to reinforce a specific narrative. In forensic psychology, this behavior is often characterized as statement convergence, where individuals subtly align their stories to protect themselves or others. The signs of such convergence are evident in the way Jerry, Kate, and David all emphasize their consistency in small, seemingly innocuous details about the visit. Even more telling is the contrast between the spontaneity of the other witnesses' statements and the rehearsed tone of the core trio's recollections. The remaining Tapas 9 members recall the evening in a more fragmented, casual manner, admitting to memory gaps and uncertainties. In contrast, the McCanns and David Payne present their accounts with striking clarity on specific points, despite the otherwise stressful and chaotic nature of the evening. To better understand these contradictions, reconstructing the timeline from their testimonies is essential. Around 5:40 p.m., Kate and Jerry return to apartment 5A after the beach. By 6 p.m., Jerry leaves for his tennis session. From approximately 6:15 p.m. onwards, Fiona, Diane, and other group members head to the tennis courts, where they claim to remain until around 7 p.m. Between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m., David Payne allegedly visits the McCann's apartment, according to Kate, Jerry, and David. The key issue lies within this half hour. The group's own testimonies, outside the central trio, place David Payne continuously at the courts during this period. Their statements not only overlap but reinforce each other, suggesting a shared perception of his presence. This leaves a glaring, dead zone in the timeline, a pocket of unverified time where the truth remains obscured. If David did indeed leave the courts for the brief visit, why was this unmentioned by everyone else? Was it genuinely unnoticed, or was it consciously omitted to avoid drawing attention to what might have happened during that visit? Additionally, some of the other group members referenced activities or actions that conveniently reinforced the McCann's account in other areas, despite these contradictions. This selective alignment of certain details, while ignoring others, raises the possibility of informal coordination. Such coordination might not necessarily involve overt deceit, but could manifest as a subconscious effort to maintain group cohesion and minimize conflict. The lack of clarity about David Payne's exact movements during this critical time frame leaves open the unsettling possibility that certain narratives were constructed or adjusted after the fact to fit a desired version of events. Whether this was done with malicious intent or simply out of a collective desire to simplify the investigation remains unclear. Nevertheless, the core takeaway from this detailed analysis is that the testimonies of Kate, Jerry, and David stand isolated, not only because they are the sole mentions of the visit, but also because their consistency appears more curated than organic. In contrast, the rest of the group's accounts, though equally flawed in places, maintain a more spontaneous and plausible flow. This observation underscores a critical weakness in the case: the presence of selective memory gaps and coordinated recollections that have, to this day, prevented a clear and uncontested timeline from emerging. The absence of agreement on such a fundamental detail suggests that the truth about what occurred in apartment 5A during that pivotal window remains hidden in plain sight, locked behind conflicting testimonies and the lingering question of who truly remembers what. Among the many unsettling threads in the investigation of Madeleine McCann's disappearance, few stand out more starkly than the Gaspar statement. This witness testimony, buried for years within the case files, contains a deeply disturbing account of David Payne's behavior during a prior holiday. Its contents raise troubling questions about the interpersonal dynamics within the so-called Tapas 9 group and, more critically, about the possible underlying psychological patterns at play. The Gaspar statement comes from Dr. Katerina Gaspar, a medical professional who, along with her husband, had vacationed with the McCanns and the Paynes before the events of Praia da Luz. In her statement, Dr. Gaspar recounts a chilling memory from that trip. One evening, as the adults sat together on a patio, she witnessed a deeply inappropriate and provocative gesture made by David Payne. According to her testimony, David Payne engaged in a sexually suggestive action while conversing with Jerry McCann about Madeleine. He inserted one of his fingers into his mouth, mimicking a sucking motion, while simultaneously using his other hand to circle his nipple in a provocative manner over his clothing. This gesture was made in the context of discussing what she would do with she understood to mean Madeleine. Dr. Gaspar explicitly recalled being shocked and deeply disturbed by the action, noting that it was not the type of comment or gesture that any adult should make, particularly in the presence of others. Equally unsettling is the fact that this was not an isolated incident. Dr. Gaspar also recounted another occasion during the same holiday when Payne performed the same suggestive gesture, this time while discussing his own daughter, Lily. Although she could not recall the precise details of the second conversation, the gesture remained vividly etched in her memory. In both cases, the provocative sexual innuendo was unmistakable. The Gaspar statement immediately provokes serious questions about David Payne's character and intent. It also casts a shadow over Jerry McCann's reaction, or rather, his stunning lack of one. Dr. Gaspar recalled that Jerry did not confront Payne or rebuke him in any way during either incident. The conversations merely paused momentarily before resuming as though nothing had happened. This non-response from Jerry McCann is itself deeply perplexing. Given the obviously inappropriate nature of the gesture, one would expect any parent, especially the father of the child involved, to react with outrage, or at least visible discomfort. Yet Jerry appeared unbothered, or at least unwilling to challenge Payne's behavior in front of others. This raises a crucial and unsettling question. Why was there such silence from the group? Why did no one else at the table, aside from Dr. Gaspar, seem to react? Was this an example of misplaced social politeness, an effort to avoid conflict, or something more ominous? The Gaspar statement, therefore, points toward a deeper issue within the Tapas 9. It suggests that either the group's boundaries for acceptable behavior were dangerously lax, or that there was a collective reluctance to acknowledge or confront inappropriate conduct within their circle. Both possibilities are troubling. Equally significant is the disturbing contrast between this testimony and David Payne's own words when later describing Madeleine to the police. When asked by Detective Constable Messiah to describe Madeleine, Payne provided a response that many observers found unsettling in its own right. He described Madeleine as very striking, beautiful child, going so far as to call her doll-like. He emphasized her physical appearance repeatedly, noting her very pretty, blonde hair in a bob, and her petite frame. He described her as bubbly, very bright, and said she was good fun to interact with. Payne repeatedly highlighted her beauty, saying she was very unique looking, and referring to her as Kate and Jerry's pride and joy. He also noted her distinctive iris defect, but quickly returned to her charm and physical appeal, stating that she was very happy, lucky child, who interacted well with others. What is immediately apparent in this statement is Payne's overwhelming focus on Madeleine's appearance. While it is not unusual for someone to describe a missing child as beautiful or charming, Payne's language veers into overly detailed and, arguably, obsessive territory. Terms like doll-like, and the repeated emphasis on her hair, body size, and overall beauty strike an uncomfortable chord, especially given his prior behavior as described in the Gaspar statement. The juxtaposition between Payne's recorded gestures and his later statements raises questions about the true nature of his relationship with Madeleine. Is this merely a case of an awkward man with poor social filters, as some defenders have argued, or is there something more sinister beneath the surface? Psychologically, Payne's behavior in the Gaspar statement and his words to police share common threads: an apparent fixation on the physical aspects of young girls and an inability or unwillingness to recognize boundaries. The question then arises, was Payne's detailed description of Madeleine driven by genuine affection and concern, or by something darker? This conundrum also brings into sharper focus the role of Jerry McCann and his apparent tolerance for Payne's actions. Was Jerry simply uncomfortable confronting a friend? Or did his silence suggest a shared understanding or normalization of such behavior within the group? The fact that other witnesses present during the incidents also failed to react supports the possibility of a collective desensitization or even complicity. It is essential to approach these questions carefully without making unfounded accusations. However, the evidence within the Gaspar statement cannot be dismissed lightly. It provides a rare and unsettling glimpse into an aspect of the Tapas 9's dynamic that has been largely overlooked in mainstream discussions of the case. Adding another layer of complexity is the fact that the Gaspar statement remained buried in the case files for years, only coming to wider attention after public releases of police documents. This delay raises concerns about the thoroughness of the initial investigation and whether certain leads were deliberately downplayed. In the broader context of the Madeleine McCann case, the Gaspar statement is not merely a side note. It is a window into potentially significant behavioral patterns that may have bearing on the mystery of Madeleine's disappearance. Whether or not David Payne had any direct involvement in her disappearance remains unproven. However, his documented behavior raises legitimate concerns about his character and his influence within the group. Ultimately, the Gaspar statement forces us to confront uncomfortable but necessary questions. How should society respond to behaviors that straddle the line between socially awkward and outright predatory? At what point does a group's silence become complicity? And most importantly, could the clues to Madeleine McCann's fate have been hidden in plain sight all along, obscured by social niceties and the protective instincts of a close-knit group. As this case continues to fascinate and horrify the world, the Gaspar statement remains one of its darkest and most challenging pieces of evidence. A reminder that sometimes, the most unsettling truths are those we are least willing to face. One of the most persistent and troubling theories surrounding the disappearance of Madeleine McCann centers on what many investigators and observers refer to as the 49-minute gap, or the missing 49 minutes. This window of time, roughly between 8:30 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. on the night of May 3, 2007, has sparked extensive debate because it represents a period during which the actions of key individuals were either unaccounted for or cloaked in ambiguity. Proponents of the theory argue that this time frame would have been sufficient for the concealment, movement, or temporary disposal of Madeleine's body. The argument is simple yet chilling. 49 minutes is ample time for individuals, particularly those familiar with the resort's layout, to hide or relocate a small child's body without detection. Crucially, during this period, the group of friends known as the Tapas 9 appeared to have maintained a flexible approach to checking on the children, with some checks allegedly overlapping or going unrecorded. One of the most compelling aspects of this theory is the assertion that the search efforts in the immediate aftermath of Madeleine's reported disappearance were fundamentally flawed. The initial assumption by both the McCanns and resort staff was that Madeleine had wandered off or been abducted by an outsider. As a result, searchers focused primarily on open spaces, streets, and surrounding areas, all operating under the belief that they were looking for a living child. This presumption had critical implications. No one thought to inspect luggage, suitcases, or large bags that could have been used to conceal a body. According to reports, people were allowed to move freely with their belongings without undergoing any thorough searches. This oversight left a massive blind spot that could have been exploited during those crucial minutes. Adding to the strangeness is the recurring mention of a kit bag, or large sports bag associated with the McCanns and their circle of friends. Multiple witnesses noted the presence of such a bag during the trip. Yet there is little evidence to suggest that it was examined thoroughly in the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance. Critics of the investigation point out that this bag could have been used to transport her body, especially considering that a child her size could easily fit inside. Suspicion deepened further when cadaver dogs, specially trained to detect the scent of death, alerted to various locations and objects associated with the McCanns. Notably, the dogs indicated the presence of cadaver scent inside a rental car used by the McCanns weeks after Madeleine vanished. Even more disturbing was the fact that the dogs also alerted to specific items of clothing belonging to Kate McCann. The rental car's involvement is particularly intriguing. Though it was hired weeks after Madeleine's disappearance, the detection of cadaver scent led many to speculate that the body may have been temporarily hidden and later moved using the vehicle. The McCanns, however, maintained that the scent could have been transferred through other means, such as contact with contaminated items. Skeptics remain unconvinced, given the consistency of the dog's reactions and their established reliability in other cases. Kate's clothing also raises difficult questions. Forensic evidence showed that cadaver dogs repeatedly signaled on specific items of her clothing. While some defenders argue that this could result from innocent contamination, others view it as an undeniable sign that Kate had direct contact with Madeleine's corpse at some point after her death. Taken together, these elements paint a troubling picture. The 49-minute window provided sufficient time for those involved to take drastic action, particularly when considering that the initial search was narrowly focused and inadequately supervised. The lack of immediate scrutiny on personal belongings and the subsequent findings of cadaver scent in the car and on clothing suggest that the opportunity and means to conceal and later transport a body did exist. While the theory remains unproven, it continues to cast a long shadow over the case, serving as a grim reminder of the unanswered questions that still haunt the investigation. In examining the complex layers of the Madeleine McCann case, One question that inevitably arises is motive. If we are to entertain theories suggesting that Madeleine's death was not the result of an outside abduction, but instead an internal incident, we must ask, what could drive such an extreme response from her parents or those close to them? One of the most frequently discussed possibilities is that of an accidental death, potentially caused by medication or physical trauma. There has been long-standing speculation that Madeleine may have been given a sedative to ensure she and her siblings remained asleep while the adults dined at the Tapas restaurant. If so, a miscalculation in dosage or an unforeseen reaction could have led to fatal consequences. Another possibility is an accidental fall or injury that occurred while the children were left unattended. If such an accident did occur, the stakes for Jerry and Kate McCann would have been monumental. Both were medical professionals, fully aware of the legal implications of their actions. Additionally, their personal history added another layer of psychological pressure. The McCanns had struggled for years with infertility, eventually resorting to in vitro fertilization, IVF, to conceive Madeleine and her siblings. In their minds, the loss of Madeleine could potentially be compounded by losing custody of their remaining children, a prospect that would have been devastating. Beyond the immediate fear for their family, the McCanns also faced the risk of irreparable damage to their reputations and careers. A public scandal involving the accidental death of their child, especially under suspicious or negligent circumstances, would likely have led to professional disgrace and financial ruin. Such fears could plausibly push individuals toward desperate decisions, including covering up the death. Under this scenario, the theory becomes even more unsettling when considering the possibility of group complicity. The Tapas 9, the close-knit group of friends vacationing together, may have either actively assisted or passively allowed the concealment of Madeleine's death. Given the tight social bonds within the group and their shared professional backgrounds, it is conceivable that some members might have agreed to help cover up the incident to protect the McCanns and, by extension, themselves from collateral fallout. The method of concealment under this theory also raises significant questions. The most commonly suggested tactic involves carrying Madeleine's body disguised as a sleeping child. This could have been done during the initial 49-minute window or in the hours that followed, allowing the body to be temporarily hidden without drawing attention. In the days and weeks following the incident, it is theorized that the McCanns or their associates may have rented a vehicle to relocate the body to a more permanent hiding place. This theory is supported by the detection of cadaver scent in the rental car and on certain personal items. While circumstantial, these details have fueled speculation that the body was stored temporarily before being moved later when the media and police scrutiny began to subside. Ultimately, the motive analysis within this theory hinges on the convergence of overwhelming personal stakes and the availability of opportunity. Fear of losing their children, careers, and reputations could have driven the McCanns to make unfathomable choices. The close-knit nature of their social circle may have provided both the moral justification and logistical support to execute and maintain the cover-up. Though unproven, this scenario remains one of the most widely debated aspects of the case, highlighting how fear, shame, and loyalty can potentially drive even ordinary people into extraordinary and tragic decisions. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Madeleine McCann case is the potential group dynamics at play within the Tapas 9. This close-knit circle of friends shared more than just meals and holiday plans. They appeared to operate with a subtle but powerful sense of unity throughout the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance. Many observers have questioned whether this group exhibited signs of an unspoken pact or implicit agreement to maintain a specific narrative. A closer analysis of their police statements reveals an unusual degree of alignment, particularly in seemingly minor or irrelevant details. This phenomenon, often referred to as the inclusion of superfluous details, is well known in psychological investigations. When multiple witnesses independently volunteer the same unnecessary information, It can suggest prior discussion or even rehearsal of statements. In this case, certain group members repeatedly emphasized identical aspects of their routines, such as the sequence of events at dinner, or how many minutes passed between their individual checks on the children. Such precise and consistent recollections, especially under emotional strain, raise suspicion. It is rare for multiple witnesses to remember exact timings and minor actions with such clarity in a high-stress situation. This uniformity points toward a possibility that the group may have consciously or unconsciously coordinated their testimonies to present a consistent story. Group psychology provides further insight into why this could have occurred. First and foremost, there is the element of self-preservation. Each member of the Tapas 9 had something to lose if the investigation turned toward negligence or worse. By sticking to a unified account, they could collectively shield themselves from suspicion and legal repercussions. Another key factor is the inherent desire to protect friends. This instinct becomes especially potent in groups bound by strong social or professional ties, as was the case here. Several members of the group were doctors, bound not only by friendship, but also by mutual reputations. The potential disgrace of one could tarnish all. In such settings, there is often a powerful, if unspoken, drive to close ranks and protect the group from external threats. Additionally, fear of the unknown likely played a role. The possibility of facing intense police scrutiny, media harassment, or even criminal charges could have led the group to adopt a strategy of strict message control. Once they realized how much public and legal attention the case had attracted, it would have been difficult to deviate from their original story without jeopardizing their credibility or drawing further suspicion. Several lingering questions highlight the potential for a deeper, shared knowledge within the group. One of the most significant is why Jerry McCann remained silent in the face of David Payne's alleged inappropriate behavior, as described in the Gaspar statement. Payne's actions, involving sexually suggestive gestures while discussing children, should have triggered outrage or at least discomfort. Yet, according to Dr. Katerina Gaspar, Jerry did not react at all. This silence, whether from shock, complicity, or a desire to avoid conflict, remains deeply troubling. Equally puzzling is the group's uniform response regarding David Payne's visit to apartment 5A. Only Jerry, Kate, and David himself mention this visit, while all other members claim either not to have noticed it or omitted entirely from their accounts. Given that they were all in close proximity and frequently referenced each other's movements, it seems unlikely that such a visit could go unnoticed by everyone else. This conspicuous absence suggests one of two possibilities. Either the group collectively decided to omit the visit from their statements to prevent further complications, or they had indeed discussed the visit beforehand and agreed on a version of events that excluded it from most accounts. Both scenarios point toward a shared understanding, if not an explicit agreement, to manage the narrative. Ultimately, the question arises whether the entire group was aware of critical information from the outset. Was there a collective knowledge of what truly happened that night, leading to an intentional or subconscious effort to shield themselves and each other? Or did they simply fall into a pattern of mutual protection out of fear and loyalty? While definitive answers remain elusive, the consistent patterns of alignment, the absence of internal contradictions among key testimonies, and the unresolved questions surrounding David Payne's behavior and movements all suggest that the Tapas 9 may have been more than just a group of friends caught in a tragedy. They may have functioned as a unified front, bound by more than just coincidence, potentially holding secrets that remain buried to this day. To deepen the understanding of the Tapas 9's behavior and provide a more comprehensive perspective on their actions following Madeleine McCann's disappearance, it is essential to explore the situation through the lens of forensic psychology. The phenomenon of collective alignment in testimonies, whether intentional or subconscious, can often be explained by psychological mechanisms that arise in high-pressure, crisis situations. Groupthink, a well-documented psychological concept, is particularly relevant in this context. Coined by psychologist Irving Janus, Groupthink describes how cohesive groups can unconsciously suppress dissenting views to maintain group harmony. In high-stakes situations where legal consequences, media scrutiny, and social disgrace loom large, individuals within a tightly knit group may instinctively align their recollections and responses. This instinctive behavior is driven not only by fear, but also by a subconscious desire to protect the group's integrity and avoid emotional turmoil. In the case of the Tapas 9, this dynamic could have manifested as a shared, unspoken agreement to downplay or omit specific details. For instance, the selective omissions regarding David Payne's alleged visit to apartment 5A may not necessarily indicate deliberate deception. Instead, it could reflect a psychological defense mechanism where individuals avoid addressing uncomfortable truths that might disrupt the group's unity. Psychologists specializing in forensic investigations have noted that memory conformity is common in group settings, particularly following traumatic or high-stress events. According to research published in the Journal of Applied Research in Memory and Cognition, individuals often unintentionally adopt details from others' accounts, blending them with their own memories to create a coherent, but potentially inaccurate, narrative. In such cases, group members may genuinely believe their synchronized accounts, even if those accounts diverge from reality. Adding to this complexity is the social and professional bond shared by the Tapas 9. As medical professionals and close friends, they had both personal and professional reputations at stake. This overlapping of personal and professional identities likely intensified their instinct to present a unified front, whether consciously or not. Experts such as Dr. Lawrence Allison, a professor of forensic psychology at the University of Liverpool, emphasize that such behavior is not uncommon. In high-pressure investigations, he notes, witnesses may unconsciously align their stories to reduce cognitive dissonance and alleviate collective anxiety. People are naturally inclined to create shared narratives that make sense of distressing events. Allison explains. In doing so, they might omit or reinterpret information in ways that feel emotionally safer. These psychological insights offer a plausible framework for interpreting the Tapas 9's consistent yet conflicting testimonies. While some may view these as evidence of a deliberate cover-up, it is also possible that groupthink, memory conformity, and emotional self-protection played significant roles in shaping their narratives. The aftermath of Madeleine McCann's disappearance has been marked by a series of contentious developments that have fueled widespread debate and deepened the sense of mystery surrounding the case. Among the most polarizing issues has been the handling of key forensic evidence, particularly the findings of cadaver and blood detection dogs. Specially trained dogs were brought in to search various locations associated with the McCann case, including the apartment where Madeleine was last seen, and a rental car used by the McCanns weeks after her disappearance. The dogs alerted to multiple locations, signaling the scent of cadaver and the presence of blood. These alerts included areas inside apartment 5A, specific items of clothing, and the aforementioned rental car. Despite the dogs' well-documented accuracy in other investigations, their findings were largely dismissed or downplayed by both British and Portuguese authorities. Critics argue that this dismissal represented a significant misstep. Rather than prompting a more focused inquiry, the evidence was relegated to a secondary consideration, often framed as inconclusive or unreliable. This sidelining of potentially crucial forensic leads became one of the most criticized aspects of the investigation, prompting accusations of bias and incompetence. The initial police response to Madeleine's disappearance also raised serious concerns. Reports indicate that the early stages of the investigation were marred by a lack of coordination, inadequate search protocols, and a general reluctance to treat the case with the urgency it required. Witnesses described chaotic scenes in the hours following the disappearance, with resort staff and guests leading the search efforts while law enforcement appeared slow to mobilize. Moreover, the investigation appeared to lack a coherent strategy, shifting focus erratically from one suspect to another without a clear evidentiary basis. This included the high-profile targeting of Robert Murat, a local resident, whose life was turned upside down by intense police scrutiny and media speculation before being officially cleared of any involvement. The apparent randomness of these shifts suggested a reactive, rather than proactive, approach to solving the case. Compounding these investigative shortcomings was the McCann's adept control over the media narrative. Almost from the outset, they engaged public relations professionals to manage their image and shape public perception. Through carefully orchestrated press appearances, selective interviews, and a robust online presence, the McCanns were able to steer much of the media coverage in their favor. To provide a more comprehensive understanding of the Madeleine McCann case, it is crucial to closely examine the McCanns' deliberate media strategy and its impact on public perception. From the earliest days following Madeleine's disappearance, Kate and Jerry McCann demonstrated an acute awareness of the media's power to shape narratives. They employed a variety of calculated tactics to frame their story and maintain control over the public discourse. One of their first strategic moves was to swiftly hire public relations professionals, including high-profile media advisors with extensive experience in crisis management. These advisors carefully orchestrated press appearances, ensured consistent messaging across interviews, and tightly controlled media access to the family. The McCanns also launched an official website and leveraged social media platforms to reinforce their status as grieving parents and to highlight their campaign to find Madeleine. Key elements of their strategy included the use of emotionally charged imagery, such as family photos and videos of Madeleine, as well as appeals to shared parental fears. The campaign repeatedly emphasized their roles as caring, competent parents caught in an unimaginable nightmare, subtly steering the narrative away from any scrutiny of their own actions. Another significant tactic involved shifting focus toward potential external perpetrators. Through press conferences and media statements, the McCanns and their representatives continuously stressed the theory of stranger abduction, despite the lack of definitive evidence supporting it. This approach not only maintained public sympathy, but also diverted attention from discrepancies in witness testimonies and early forensic findings. The McCanns also used their platform to preemptively discredit unfavorable narratives. They publicly criticized Portuguese police, framing the investigation as incompetent and unjust, which effectively rallied British media and much of the public to their side. By presenting themselves as victims of both a crime and a flawed investigation, they successfully maintained the focus on their search for Madeleine while deflecting criticism. Over time, this calculated media management created a polarized public landscape. Supporters viewed the McCanns as courageous parents fighting against bureaucratic indifference, while skeptics questioned the sincerity of their efforts and the inconsistencies in their accounts. From a broader perspective, the McCann case became a powerful example of how media manipulation can significantly sway public opinion in high-profile investigations. It highlights the risks of allowing media narratives to overshadow forensic evidence and careful investigative work. This media strategy extended beyond mere damage control. It allowed the McCanns to highlight their version of events, downplay inconsistencies, and cast themselves as victims of both a tragic crime and a flawed investigation. While many sympathized with their plight, others viewed this level of media management with suspicion, seeing it as a means to obscure uncomfortable truths. The combination of investigative missteps and media manipulation created an environment ripe for confusion and conspiracy theories. Over time, the public discourse surrounding the case became increasingly polarized, with different factions championing competing narratives. Some remained convinced of the McCanns' innocence, viewing them as grieving parents unfairly maligned by inept authorities. Others believed that the McCanns and their inner circle were involved in a cover-up, pointing to the dismissed forensic evidence and inconsistencies in witness statements as proof. These unresolved tensions ultimately contributed to the case's descent into a morass of doubt and speculation. The investigations, both in Portugal and later in the United Kingdom, became bogged down by legal hurdles, diplomatic sensitivities, and a lack of fresh leads. With each passing year, the prospects of a definitive resolution seem to diminish. In the broader context of missing persons cases, the McCann investigation has come to symbolize the perils of mishandled evidence, poor initial responses, and the power of media to shape outcomes. It serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of failing to prioritize clear-eyed investigation over public relations, and about how quickly a search for truth can be derailed by competing agendas. To this day, the fate of Madeleine McCann remains unknown, and the case continues to provoke debate and controversy. While some cling to hope for a breakthrough, others believe that the most important questions have already been asked and deliberately left unanswered. As the layers of the Madeleine McCann case are peeled back, one truth becomes undeniable. This is a story riddled with contradictions, strange behavior, and haunting questions that remain unanswered. Despite the passage of years, the case continues to provoke intense debate, not only because of its tragic core, but because of the unresolved inconsistencies that cloud every aspect of the investigation. Central to the confusion are the conflicting witness statements provided by the key figures in the case, particularly those within the Tapas 9. From the disputed visit by David Payne to apartment 5A, to the shifting recollections about who was present at the tennis courts and at what time, the testimonies are marked by discrepancies. Kate and Jerry McCann, along with David Payne, maintain that Payne briefly visited apartment 5A around 6:30 p.m. to check on Kate and the children. However, the remaining members of the group either omit this detail entirely or directly contradict it, insisting that David remained at the tennis courts during that time. Similarly, the accounts of the evening routine on May 3 vary wildly. Statements differ on everything from when the group left the beach, who went where, and the precise sequence of checking intervals. The uniformity in some of the testimonies, especially regarding minor, non-essential details, raises the possibility of coordinated narratives. This alignment is particularly suspicious given the natural fallibility of memory under stress. The contradictions are not merely about small lapses. They concern pivotal moments that could hold the key to what really happened. Beyond conflicting stories, the behavior of several individuals in the case adds another troubling dimension. David Payne's prior actions, documented in the Gaspar statement, reveal deeply inappropriate and unsettling conduct. His police interview about Madeleine further heightens concerns, as he fixates on her appearance in oddly specific and repetitive terms. Meanwhile, Jerry McCann's apparent indifference to Payne's disturbing behavior during their prior holiday, and his lack of response in the moment, continue to raise eyebrows. Added to this is the highly questionable response to forensic evidence. Cadaver dogs alerted to several key locations, including apartment 50A, Kate McCann's clothing, and the rental car used by the McCanns weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. Rather than prompting deeper investigation, these findings were largely dismissed or explained away as irrelevant. Despite the dog's proven track record in other cases, even more alarming are the signs that suggest deliberate efforts to obscure evidence. Reports describe strange behavior such as the airing out of the rental car, the use of air fresheners, and the inconsistent explanations regarding missing or unexamined items like the kit bag. The initial searches focused solely on finding a living child, leaving avenues like luggage, vehicles, and closed spaces unchecked during the critical early hours. These oversights offered ample opportunity for crucial evidence to be concealed or destroyed. The cumulative weight of these factors points toward a disturbing possibility that the truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann was not merely elusive but was actively buried. Was this a case of catastrophic investigative failures, or did some individuals deliberately obstruct the path to justice? Was the media-driven narrative of an outside abduction allowed to dominate as a means of avoiding deeper scrutiny of those closest to Madeleine? In the end, the case leaves us with more questions than answers. Despite years of investigations, documentaries, and theories, the same unsettling contradictions remain at its heart. The precise truth of what happened that night in Praia de Luz may never be fully uncovered, but the lingering inconsistencies cast a long and ominous shadow over everyone involved. Ultimately, the most haunting question lingers: was this a case that could never be solved, or one that was never meant to be? And perhaps, the most chilling conclusion of all is not about who entered or left apartment 5A that night, but what was already inside. In the end, it wasn't the darkness outside apartment 5A that swallowed Madeleine McCann. It was the darkness within.